I am here with the one and only Mr. Roger Corman. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Corman.
Happy to be here, Vance.
I just wanted to start off and say that your professional output has spanned everything from women in prison pictures to Academy Award-winning foreign films. And so I'm just wondering, do you still get out to the movies? And if so, what kind of movies do you like to go and see? Because you span the whole creation.
My wife and I still get out to movies, but not as much as we would want to. If you're spending a good part of the week in the editing room here looking at films, it's a little difficult to say, oh, let's go out and see a film. So we see a lot of things on television, on Netflix, and we save the more important films because we know the Academy is going to be sending us the DVDs of all the nominees.
Mm-hmm. What is it that gets you most excited about still doing this job?
What gets me most excited is still the original idea, coming up with an idea that I think is as original as you can be. You can never be 100% original, but as original as you can be, that is exciting to me and that I hope will be exciting to the audience, and then to develop that into screenplay and work on from there through production.
You've said elsewhere that you first sort of got involved in film by reviewing for the Stanford paper. I'm wondering, was there a particular film, either in that experience or before or after, that really made you fall in love with movies?
I think one of the first pictures I reviewed for the Stanford Daily was a John Ford Western. I think it was My Darling Clementine. I was really impressed with the fact that it was so beautifully photographed. He photographs in a famous place up in Utah, mm-hmm. I think, and the performances, the action, the framing of the shots all came together. Probably, it wasn't necessarily better than anything I had seen before. It was the fact that I was examining that now carefully, whereas before I was just sitting watching the film.
Now, I personally, I love your directorial work, and I will fight anybody who tries to dismiss it. Your framing and your camera movements, and you just talked about that a little bit with My Darling Clementine. I admire the hell out of how you shot your films, and I'm wondering, did you have any particular directorial influences that shaped your approach to the camera movement and the framing?
I had no particular individual influence. It was the influence really of all the films that I had seen. One of the things I was very interested in, or that was important to me, was trying to get a sense of depth on a low budget. On a bigger budget film, you will have bigger sets, so you'll have great depth. And what I came up with was to have some sort of foreground composition, say in this part of the frame, the actors there, and then behind them something moving, so I was working in three dimensions.
That is really interesting. I teach acting, and I kind of coach directing a little bit sometimes, and one of the core pieces of advice that I always give people is compose your shots in depth. So have as many layers to the camera as possible. So that's really nice to hear. I'd love to talk about a couple of the Poe films. For me, The Haunted Palace is the best H.P. Lovecraft adaptation that I've ever seen, and I'm curious how the case of Charles Dexter Ward became an Edgar Allan Poe film.
I had been making a series of Edgar Allan Poe films with Vincent Price as the lead, and I always liked Lovecraft, and I liked the case of Charles Dexter Ward, so I convinced American International to let me move away from Poe. After I had made the picture, they decided that Poe was a selling name, and there was something in a poem or something about a haunted palace that fit that picture, so they changed the name of the picture to The Haunted Palace. Nobody ever said that your advertising had to have any particular relation to the picture.
Now, my kid's favorite of the Poe films is The Raven. So in that one, you had both Peter Lorre and Boris Karloff, and then in Tales of Terror, you had Basil Rathbone. And when I think about all those people, they probably first all made their mark in the 30s when you would have been very young. And I'm curious, was there any special significance for you in being able to direct these actors that you had probably seen on screens for as long as you've been seeing anybody on screens?
There was a certain difficulty and significance. I knew these were all very good actors, far more experienced than I was, and the question is, how can I direct them? And what I decided to do was to work with them and respect the work they had done and the fact that they were veterans and I was a young person. So defer to them as much as possible, but to get my thoughts forward as politely, and I don't know if deferential is the word, but in that manner.
Just on a kind of tangential note, and I was wondering what your experience with Peter was. My
experience with Peter Lorre was very good. I particularly liked the fact that he used a lot of improvisation. He'd been with Bertolt Brecht in the Berliner Ensemble, which specialized in improvised acting. The only problem, if there was one, and it was a slight problem, was that Peter was improvising and he was very, very funny. I loved what he was doing. Boris Karloff, on the other hand, came from a classical English theatrical tradition, and Boris said to me on the morning of the second day of shooting, I come in, I've learned my lines, I'm ready to give the performance, and Peter is improvising all over the place and I don't know what to say. So I brought everybody together and we discussed it, and I said, Peter, what you're doing is wonderful, but stay a little bit closer to the script. And essentially I didn't say it this way, Boris, loosen up a little bit. The net result, from then on in, we got along very well.
In an interview on a special feature for The Shining, I remember Jack Nicholson saying that he learned how he broke down a script from Boris Karloff. So I figure that must have happened on probably one of your films.
Jack Nicholson played Peter Lorre's son in The Raven, and probably he did learn something from that.
For as long as I've been aware of Vincent Price, his name has always been synonymous with horror. But kind of looking back at the actual filmography, he'd been working since the 30s, and before House of Usher, he'd done House of Wax and maybe a couple William Castle movies, but I didn't get the sense that he was sort of a known quantity as a boogeyman. So I'm wondering what you saw in Vincent to make him the backbone of this horror franchise.
Well, Vincent had started as a leading man, a slightly romantic leading man, but more of a character leading man. He was a very complex and intelligent man, and as he grew older and couldn't play the leads anymore, he made the move into more character-driven roles, and Bill Castle had put him in one of his films. Bill was a good friend of mine, and I was aware of Vincent's background and knew that he had done something in horror, and I thought the fact that he was such a good actor and he had had a name for such a long period of time, and the first picture was The Fall of the House of Usher, and I thought he was perfect for Roderick Usher.
That's really interesting that you say that you were close with William Castle, because I was going to ask, did you ever hang out with William Castle? Because I really would have liked to have been there to hear those conversations.
I used to play tennis with Bill Castle at his tennis court, and the main information I could give you, which is a little late now, Bill was a little heavy, and if you're playing tennis, hit from one side of the court to the other and keep them running.
Changing gears a little bit, you were on the ground, you were making films at the end of the production code, and as foreign films like I Am Curious Yellow completely changed what could be shown in films. And I'm wondering if you had, as that change was happening, if you had any personal feelings about a new license to show and depict things in film that you never were able to do before.
My personal take was that the code had been too conservative all along, and the loosening up I thought was very good, because it enabled us to go a little farther in depicting what we wanted to do. I never got into I Am Curious Yellow or X-rated or anything like that, but the movement into R-rated films did give me more latitude.
I always felt, and this goes back a little bit to The Raven, but also to the sort of poking fun at the bohemian art world in A Bucket of Blood, and our fascination with violence in the Death Race movies, like even the new Death Race 2050. I always felt that you had a very subtle but very deft touch with humor and with satire. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you'd like to poke fun at now.
It's too easy a target, but the present administration is something that you could poke fun at. As a matter of fact, in Death Race 2050, I projected that in the year 2050, the United States of America would be the United Corporations of America, and the president would be the chairman of the board. Malcolm McDowell played the chairman, and just as a whim, we gave him a Donald Trump hairdo. This was early in the primary season. We had no idea he would become president, but we can now say we are the first picture to portray Donald Trump as president.
I don't know how to feel about that.
An example of what you talked about, of using violence, humor, satire, and for me making a social statement, is Death Race 2050. It is a violent picture. The whole idea, it's a race from New York to New Los Angeles, and the drivers are scored on how fast they drive and how many pedestrians they could kill. Now that, to me, was a very funny concept, but it gave me a chance to comment on violence and its relationship to the public psychology.
It's interesting. I'm rereading It Can't Happen Here. As the totalitarian regime gets more and more powerful and gets more and more people that are sort of willing converts, the thing that you see is just casual, extreme violence. It's interesting in the context of the Death Race movies, because in those, violence is sport. It's an interesting parallel between violence being just an everyday occurrence under a totalitarian sort of system, and then it being something that is done for sport. And so I'm wondering, off screen in the Death Race movies, is violence pervasive? Is that same level of sort of ultra-violence pervasive in those societies, or is it just kept for sport?
I had gone all the way back to the Roman gladiatorial games, and the fact that the Romans did use the gladiatorial games as a way of controlling or pacifying the working people, the plebeians, was the idea of bread and circuses. And I took that idea, updated it, and said the death race is one way of controlling or giving violence as a respite from your daily life. And that led to sort of the social comment. And I think that's been used by regimes for thousands of years.
On a lighter note, to circle back to A Bucket of Blood, the satire in that, I wonder if that was particular to the Bohemians or particular to the art world, or was it more inclusive?
The satire in Bucket of Blood was almost directed at ourselves. We and my friends were semi-beatniks, and we laughed a little bit at ourselves. Weirdly enough, that picture has gotten sort of a cult following, so much so that the Yale Art School invited me there to show Bucket of Blood to the art students.
That is fantastic. Since I've got you here, another movie, another great one with Dick Miller is Little Shop of Horrors, which was reportedly shot in 2 days. I want to ask, is that correct, and why?
Little Shop of Horrors was shot in 2 days and a night for some exterior shooting. It was done almost as a joke. I was working out of a small rental studio in Hollywood, and they had a nice set that was just sitting there. And I got the idea of gambling to see what I could do really fast and use a 2-camera setup. which I had never done before. So the thing was done for laughs, which I think helped the picture, because the whole crew, the cast, everybody was having fun. For instance, we started at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 8:15, the assistant director said, "We are hopelessly behind schedule." And I do have a feeling that the atmosphere on the set affects the picture.
Yeah, that is just a tremendously fun picture, and I think it does come through in not just the bigger stuff that people talk about, like Jack Nicholson's performance as the dental patient, but it comes through through the entire picture. I'm wondering if you did it kind of just to see if you could do a movie in a couple days. How long did it take to make the plant?
The prop man, Dick Rubin, made the plant. He made it in a couple of days. It was a little bit difficult because it was operated with wires, and I had to make certain that the light didn't shine off the wires. It's a technical point, but it was something to think about.
Speaking of technical minutia, what did you guys do to accomplish the nightmare sequences in Mask of the Red Death is probably the most prominent one, but a number of the Poe pictures with the filters and the warping of the image?
On the Poe pictures and other pictures, nightmare sequences and so forth, what we did was we used filters and moving color filters on the camera, and then there was a company called, I think, Butler Glauner, who did the type of special effects you could do at that time. We then worked with them with the images that were already distorted on the camera and rephotographed them to increase and modify and hopefully improve the image.
Because that was all obviously optical stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular opinion on the film versus digital, practical versus computer, any of that morass?
I like the look of film. I think it is a softer, warmer look. But on the other hand, motion pictures are part art, part technology, part business. And the technology has simply indicated that from a business standpoint, digital photography is faster, less expensive, and particularly in distribution, much less expensive than print. So we're going to digital.
Yeah, I think we're there. You guys are shooting digital now?
Yes, every picture we've made for at least the last 5 years has been digital.
You have, at every step of your career, fought very hard to do things on your own terms and in your own way. And I'm curious what that spark is. What drives that ambition to do things on your own terms?
It's simply that I want to portray my vision. And I've worked, I think, reasonably successfully several times with major studios. But unless you're a major director who can impose his own will, when you work with a major studio, you are subject to decisions that you may not agree with. So I prefer to work independently, and I finance my own pictures. Since I don't have that much money, my pictures are medium budget at best, and a lot of them are low budget.
Do you have a favorite of your films that you've made? I mean, there's 400 plus.
I've been asked a couple of times if I have a favorite. I have no real favorite. It changes from time to time. Today, maybe The Intruder, a picture I made about racial integration in the South in 1960 with a new young actor in his first role, Bill Shatner. Or maybe one of the Poe pictures, maybe Mask of the Red Death.
I think last week your Twitter account asked the question, what is your favorite Roger Corman movie? And I think that there was a range, but I think the consensus in that string was Mask of the Red Death. For my money, that is my favorite of the Poe films.
It was an interesting poll we took. A Mask of the Red Death came in #1, but #2 very close was X, the man with X-ray eyes. And I've been asked a couple of times what I would do if I were to remake one of my films, what would I pick? And I said I would pick the man with X-ray eyes, because the X-ray vision, at the time I made the picture, sometime around 1960 on a low budget, we couldn't really portray the X-ray vision. And now with computer graphics, you can do a much better job. As a matter of fact, I contacted MGM yesterday, who have the rights, and I'm going to have a meeting with them to possibly remake The Man with X-ray Eyes.
I would be very excited to go see that. I rewatched The Intruder last week. It's a fantastic movie. I'm sorry that it was the first one you lost money on. I'll tell you, it was really interesting. I'm sorry I don't know the actor's name, but at the end, the actor who comes forward and disperses the crowd is the same actor in The Haunted Palace who is the one that is most inciting the crowd and most singularly responsible for tying Vincent Price to a tree and burning him at the stake. So The Intruder would have come first. I'm wondering if there was any connection in your mind when you cast him in The Haunted Palace in essentially the 180-degree opposite role.
The actor was Frank Marshall, and I cast him simply because he was a very, very good actor. And I know he could play the good guy, he could play the bad guy. I used him in a number of films, and he always gave a very good performance.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.